Good morning, Father. It is quite the Wednesday, isn't it? All right, so we've gotten through the 3 different rooms and the 3 different chapters of the Sermon on the Mount. So now we are on chapter 5. I hope you are listening to the conversations. I'm loving them. I'm a little behind on them. Haven't listened to chapter 4 yet. But it's all really cool. Okay. Chapter 5, desirable to make one happy. In all, the language of his fathers. At this point, it may be worth asking, what sort of document is the Sermon on the Mount? If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, I suspect that by this point, you see that it's an ordinance. That only raises the question, though, why would anyone write an ordinance down in this fashion? In this connection, there's an interesting note in the book of Mosiah about the education that King Benjamin gave his sons. And apparently, quoting Benjamin, quote, "And it came to pass that he had 3 sons, and he called their names Mosiah, and Heloram, and Helaman, and to cause that they should be taught in all the language of his fathers, that thereby they might become men of understanding, and that they might know concerning the prophecies which had been spoken by the mouths of their fathers, which were delivered them by the hand of the Lord. And he also taught them concerning the records which were engraven on the plates of brass, saying, My sons, I would that you should remember that were it not for these plates which contain these records and these commandments, we must have suffered in ignorance, even at this present time, not knowing the mysteries of God. For it were not possible that our father Lehi could have remembered all these things, to have taught them to his children, except it were for the help of these plates. For he having been taught in the language of the Egyptians, therefore he could read these engravings, and teach them to his children, that thereby they could teach them to their children, and so fulfilling the commandments of God, even down to this present time. I say unto you, my sons, were it not for these things which have been kept and preserved by the hand of God, that we might read and understand of his mysteries, and have his commandments always before our eyes, that even our fathers would have dwindled in unbelief, and we should have been like unto our brethren, the Lamanites, who know nothing concerning these things, or even do not believe them when they are taught them, because of the traditions of their fathers, which are not correct. O my sons, I would that you should remember that these sayings are true, and also that these records are true, and behold, also the plates of Nephi, which contain the records and the sayings of our fathers from the time they left Jerusalem until now, and they are true. And we can know of their surety, because we have them before our eyes. And now, my sons, I would that ye should remember to search them diligently, that ye may profit thereby. And I would that ye should keep the commandments of God, that ye may prosper in the land according to the promises which the Lord made unto our fathers. It's Mosiah 1, 2-7. Having a written version of the mysteries is necessary, because otherwise Lehi wouldn't have been able to remember all these things. That rings true. The Sermon on the Mount is long and complex, with reoccurring motifs intertwining narratives and multiple plants and payoffs. Memorizing it would have been a serious task, and a risky one. Writing the course of the Lord down, even in the skeletal, elusive fashion in which we have it, reduces the possibility that you might forget key details, or that the person who learned the ritual might die without passing it on. For Nephi to have known the Sermon on the Mount and to have experienced it as the course of the Lord, the sermon had to have predated Nephi. Here we have a clear indication that the mysteries were written on the brass plates. We should remember that Nephi also connects his education. He was taught somewhat in all the learning of his father, to his knowledge of the mysteries. Maybe the Nephi prophets saw knowledge of the mysteries as a learned skill available to men of understanding. Benjamin also says that the written record lets him read and understand of God's mysteries. So, the Sermon on the Mount not only preserves the ordinance, it also serves as a meditation text. A person who has walked the course of the Lord can read and reflect on the sermon as a way to ponder the experience of the ordinance. Realize also that the context of this passage in Mosiah is education. Benjamin is discussing what he taught his sons, which includes languages and prophecies. The Sermon on the Mount can also serve as a preparatory text to teach people before they experience the mysteries of God. I imagine Benjamin's sons being required to commit the sermon to heart, discussing its meaning, recognizing its numerical patterns, and being pointed to related texts. Yeah. Numerical patterns, interesting, yeah. Again, it depends on how far you go into numerology, because I think there's the numerology section of Hebrew Bible study and liturgy. I think it's extremely educational. At the same time, I think it's been mixed in with so much modern numerology that I don't know. Maybe it's because that is an area I have zero insight into. I see the results of it and I go, I get where they're coming from. It just seems one step removed. It's like having one foot in the clouds, where you're just like, I get it, but watch that first step. Anyway, to me, looking at symbology and using it as a way to emotionally, mentally connect with the story makes sense to me. Because in the end, you are trying to truly understand the weight and power of a situation, whether it's through metaphor and allegory and simile and symbology, all of that. It's all to the point of, we're talking about, Jesus Christ is the Savior. He is the one who ransoms you. He is the one who pays for our sins. He is the one who takes the sin upon himself. And using all sorts of symbols for you to get it makes sense to me. The whole numerology part seems a little more like one more step away, which is weird because, I love math and science. I love numbers, but the purpose is that you have to understand what the numbers are seriously talking about for it to make any sense. And it's not just when you're doing math, you can just, one of the funniest things, I think it was this old movie, Star Crash. That's a really stupid, funny show, especially when you're doing it with Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they're just throwing out numbers. It's like, quick, go to 10, and, our speed is 12, with no actual units afterwards, and it's useless, right? You don't know, are they going kilometers per hour, miles per hour? Are they doing 12 astronomical units a second? Is it without units at the end? Throwing out numbers don't mean anything. Without tying the numbers to something tangible, it doesn't mean anything. And this is why numerology, in my opinion, has more of one foot in a cloud, is because what are you ascribing to it? And how truly relatable is it to the human experience that it makes sense? Or can that be muddied by our modern cultural influences? For example, late 90s, early 2000s, The Secret swept swept through the country of, you focus on it, you meditate it, you manifest it in your life. In many ways, it was a huge study in positive um, positive bias reinforcement. Um, and in many ways, I can see it tapping into the feelings, ideas, and concepts of faith that people have. And that's why it was so prevalent, is because you have this belief and trust in things, and when it happens, it serves as that positive confirmation bias. But when it doesn't happen, you just still are hoping, wishing, focusing on it. But it depends. If you hope and wish and focus on it, if you're taking actions towards it, then in many ways you're producing the results that you're looking for, which is good, which is kind of how faith works. Is the idea is that you trust or believe in a concept. And by trusting and believing in a concept, if the concept is true, it makes a difference. And specifically, there are things that you can trust in that are concepts that are true, that are intangible, such as justice. There is no particle of justice in the universe that I'm aware of. You don't add gold to helium plus a little bit of silver to get justice. That's not a thing. Justice is a concept. It is an intangible thing that when you believe in justice, it actually starts to exist. Because as you believe in it, it changes how you think and operate in the world. And as you think and operate in the world differently, it causes things to occur. And in the same way that if you have faith, also produces tangible results, because if you, for example, the pioneers believing in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they were horribly persecuted and literally were besieged in Nauvoo, and mortars raining down on them as they're not leaving fast enough for the likes of the Missouri Mob and the Missouri Extermination Order. And was that in Missouri or was that in Nauvoo? I think it happened in Nauvoo as they were leaving too, because Nauvoo is in Illinois. But anyway, despite all that hardship, every time they moved and every place that they went, because of their belief in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, specifically that it's Jesus Christ's church, and that they are trying to help restore Israel, that they would be upheld. They were, and in many ways, in very miraculous ways, because when they arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, the soil was crap. It was just not meant for growing good food, and it was just scrub brush. They just didn't have the nutrients in the soil that were needed. Well, what were the first crops that they were inspired to plant? Sugar beets. Those sugar beets apparently added what were the perfect plant to plant, a couple crops in before they started growing other things. And it gave nutrients to the soil that it needed. It's happenstances like this where, you trust in God, you get these promptings, and things turn out in your favor. And because of, anyway. So, sorry for the long tangent. But to me, the idea is they were being taught in the mysteries of God and recognizing the numerical patterns. As long as the numerical patterns that is in the writing is actually saying something like a math book, like here is literally how you do it. What I'm worried about is that I can see that there are easily members of the church that take the idea of the Hebrew numerology and they mix it with modern spiritualist numerology is like, oh, the stars are aligned, and I see Capricorn moving into the third phase. And I understand where it comes from. I do. I don't have as much trust in that for lots of good reasons. And it's the same thing with like The Secret and modern numerology. If it is past numerology, where they're literally structuring their words and how they speak and write according to the numbers that are associated with the letters in Hebrew, to have a second message in there, that makes sense. I'm just worried about the modern day hijacking of that to say, oh, you're an even number 22. I see. And then you have the because of that, they map out your life. It's kind of like a mix between numerology and astrology, and it just gets muddled. So, but because I have no clue about the numerology side of the Hebrew Bible, other than I know that it exists, I know that it is tantamount to a second pattern of instruction, and that it really is more like a math book, where it is like, yeah, no, you do these things to these texts, and you get this information from it, from the number side. That it's like, cool. So, I imagine Benjamin's sons being required to commit the sermon to heart, discussing its meaning, recognizing its numerical patterns, and being pointed to related text, perhaps something like what we have done in the preceding 3 chapters. Then, when they experience the actual course of the Lord, they would make multiple connections with what they have been taught and understand the sermon in new light. Yeah? The 2 references to eyes in the quotation from Benjamin are interesting. I'm reminded of Jesus' discussion of the mysteries, in which he quotes Isaiah, quote, "For this people's heart is waxed gross, their ears are dull of hearing, their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and for your ears, for they hear." That's Matthew 13, 15 through 16. When Benjamin says, we can know of their surety because we have them before our eyes, I don't think he can be saying, we know that the record is true because we have the record. I think it's more likely in the passages in which he talks about the transmission of the mysteries that he means something like, our experience in the ordinance and our understanding from the text match. All of this raises a question, or maybe it pushes us back upon an earlier question that we tiptoed around. Nephi tells us that he had great desires to know the mysteries of God, but he doesn't explicitly say, like my father did. Benjamin, though, says that Lehi remembered the mysteries with the help of the plates and taught them to his children. Do we see Lehi teaching his children the mysteries of God? I think we do. We see it in 1 Nephi 8, with which a visionary account of the same ordinance that is recorded in Matthew 5 through 7. In other words, that Nephi records a dream of his father, takes its structure from the same temple that gives structure to the Sermon on the Mount. Both the sermon and the vision are ascents through 3-part space. Both climax with the passing through a straight and narrow gate, or along a straight and narrow path, and entering into the presence of the tree with good fruit. Lehi's vision will give us additional detail to inform our understanding of the temple ordinance. The dream's consistency with the Sermon on the Mount also confirms that Lehi knew the course of the Lord. Furthermore, I think Lehi's recounting the vision may have been part of his attempt to teach his sons and prepare them to experience the mysteries of God. I think we also have a discrete reference to Lehi initiating his sons, at least. That's what's happening in 1 Nephi 2:16. As if it had been a world. And it came to pass, after I had prayed unto the Lord, and beheld a large spacious field, and I beheld a rod of iron, and it extended along the bank of the river, and led to the tree by which I stood. And I also beheld a straight and narrow path, which came along by the rod of iron, even to the tree which I stood. And it also led by the head of the fountain, unto a large and spacious field, as if it had been a world. We'll come back to the rod and the path and the tree and the fountain and all later, though you may already be making connections with what I read in the Sermon on the Mount. For the moment, I want to talk about the field. The physical structure of Lehi's dream is a little concealed by the way it's presented. Lehi meets a guide in white, quote, and it came to pass that I saw a man, and he was dressed in a white robe, and he came and stood before me. And it came to pass that he spake unto me, and bade me follow him. 1 Nephi 8, 5-6. Then Lehi seems to jump forward right to the tree. And it came to pass, I beheld a tree whose fruit was desirable to make one happy. And it came to pass that I did go forth and partake of the fruit thereof. 1 Nephi 8, 10-11. He turns and beholds the whole landscape in retrospect. Read altogether, the vision seems to play out across a three-part space, and the first space is the large and spacious field, as if it had been the world. If this is indeed a temple vision, then the first space is the ulam. There are three reasons to think the field is the ulam. The first reason is that the journey ending in the tree specified is... The first reason is that the journey ending in the tree is specified as starting in the field. The second is the physical structure of the ulam. Remember that 2 Chronicles 3:4 says that the height of the ulam was 120 cubits, making it an enormous tower at the front of the structure, whereas 1 Kings 6:3 gives no height, which is generally taken as an indication that the ulam was roofless. This later description correlates better with the layout of the tabernacle, by the way, which has no separate porch. In front of the main room of the tabernacle is simply the open space of the courtyard, so I tend to think that the ulam had no roof. Interesting. I was looking at the picture at the back, because it's a little different than his first diagram in the book, but a tall tower may be a good underlying image to be described as a large and spacious field. An unwalled, roofless porch is definitely a good match for a spacious field. It's just the open air and the courtyard. The third reason why I think this large and spacious field is the temple ulam is the comparison as if it had been a world. World in Hebrew is olam, which has many additional interesting meanings around eternity in the past, present, and future. See Brown's book about olam. Anyway, I wonder if that'll be in the extra stuff, which has many additional interesting meanings around the eternity, past, and future. Okay, the vowel that is an O in one word is a U in the other is actually the same vowel, a vav. The spelling difference between the two words is that ulam begins with an aleph and olam begins with an ayin. In biblical Hebrew, these letters are pronounced very similarly. Among the gutturals, the glottal stop, aleph, is the lightest. Ayin is related to aleph, but is a much stronger guttural. Its strongest sound is a rattled guttural g, or r, probably. Olam, and ulam, alam. The aleph sound in your throat makes, the aleph is the sound your throat makes when it closes slightly just before you say apple. So alam and halam. So slightly just before you say A in apple. This is a very subtle sound and easy to miss. Ayin is the same thing, but a little harder. The modern spoken Hebrew, the letters are pronounced identically. Practically speaking, they're both silent, only carrying the sound of the following vowel. In other words, not only does the large and spacious field look like the porch that is the first room in the temple, but when Lehi and Nephi compare it to the world, olam, they are choosing a word that sounds like the name of that porch, olam, alam. When he refers to the first room, Lehi names what he's looking at. We'll see when he continues to do so as he moves forward. The path which led to the tree. Quote, and I saw numberless concourses of people, many of whom were pressing forward, that they might obtain the path which led unto the tree by which I stood. And it came to pass that they did come forth and commence in the path which led to the tree. And it came to pass that there arose a mist of darkness, yea, even an exceedingly great mist of darkness, insomuch that they who had commenced in the path did lose their way, that they wandered off and were lost. And it came to pass that I beheld others pressing forward, and they came forth and caught hold of the end of the rod of iron, and they did press forward through the mist of darkness, clinging to the rod of iron, even until they did come forth and partake of the fruit of the tree. And after they had partaken of the fruit of the tree, they did cast their eyes about, as if they were ashamed. And I also cast my eyes round about, and beheld on the other side of the river of water a great and spacious building, and it stood, as it were, in the air, high above the earth. And it was filled with people, both old and young, both male and female, and their manner of dress was exceedingly fine. And they were in the attitude of mocking, and pointing their fingers towards those who had come, and were partaking of the fruit. 1 Nephi 8, 21 through 27. Observe the general action, which is consistent with our understanding of the course of the Lord. People come forth and follow a path. There are several reasons to see that this action is taking place in the Hekal, which is the long central room called the nave or the holy place. Set aside the tree for the moment. Lehi doesn't neatly compartmentalize the three spaces with chapter breaks like Matthew does, and the tree is clearly in the third room. First, as he does with the field, Lehi calls out the name of the space. He does so by presenting the image of the great and spacious building. As discussed above in chapter 3, there is a Hebrew word that means a great and spacious building, and that is Hekal. Looking knowingly. Second, as if to make the point clear, Lehi tells us that this Hekal stood, as it were, in the air, high above the earth. Emphasis is his. The emphasis he gave was as it were in the air, high above the earth. And that's curious phrasing that seems to say that the building didn't actually stand above the earth, it stood above the earth in some non-physical sense. As discussed above in chapter 3, the Hekal is linguistically above the Ulam and also linguistically above Jerusalem and the rest of the earth, because in Hebrew the verb of motion that describes traveling from anywhere outside the temple to the Hekal is Allah, meaning to ascend. The Hekal, or holy place, or nave, does in fact stand, as it were, in the air high above the earth in Hebrew language, because as one has to go up to get it. Wonderfully, the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, in 1 Nephi 8:27, reports that the travelers come up and were partaking of the fruit, rather than come at. The original text here, the come at, is Skousen's original manuscript. Okay, he's just showing where he got the original manuscript information. The original text here even more strongly supports the point that the great and spacious building was the Hekal, linguistically elevated above the Ulam below. In the vision, some travelers lose their way because of a mist of darkness that rises up. The mist of darkness is another reason to think that we're seeing the Hekal here. One of the notable pieces of furniture in the Hekal was the altar on which incense was burned. The mist of darkness is a visionary counterpart to the cloud of smoke billowing up from the incense altar. Finally, this Hekal is full of people, both old and young, both male and female, and their manner of dress is exceedingly fine. What they do is mock those who are attempting to move forward along the path. The word fine is tricky in King James translation because it translates several different words, and in some cases the word fine only partially translates the underlying Hebrew word. Nevertheless, across the various translations, there is a consistency. The word fine is preeminently a descriptor of things connected with the temple. Fine linen is shesh, which is used in the clothing worn in the temple and the hangings, as in fine twined linen, which is shesh mashdar, or just mashdar. We'll talk more about this fine twined linen in chapter 9 in connection with Lehi's journey through the desert. Note that in Nephi's connection with Lehi's journey through Nephi's vision that interprets his father's dream is fine clothing reappears as fine twined linen specifically. So his references are to Exodus and First Nephi that he's focusing on this fine twined stuff. Fine flour is solet, which is used in flour-based offerings. Fine gold, zahav tav, is used in the construction of the temple. And note also the good gold of the land of Havilah, adjacent to Eden. This is the same zavtav. Are we to understand that Havilah is another name for the Hekal, the land adjacent to Eden, through which one of Eden's rivers flows? Interesting. The clothing, the furnishing, the sacrifices of the temple are fine. The people who jeer at those trying to approach the tree are in some sense connected with the temple. They don't seem to all be temple priests, though. Their description as both old and young, male and female, suggests to me that what we're seeing is something like an entire political or social class. These are the temple priests, their families, and their political allies. Thus the same group that Nephi describes as the Jews who were at Jerusalem. This is the royal tribe that controls access to all the places and public buildings, including the temple and all its rooms. Remember that Hekal is the name of the second room, but can also refer to the whole building. It's worth noting that the waters here. They seem to flow from the tree in the third room, but the waters in the third room and the waters in the second room are significantly different. We'll discuss this in chapter 11. Dang it! Okay. An exceedingly great mist of darkness. Let's take a moment to discuss a point some readers may find troubling, but that I think is ultimately illuminating. You might be saying at this point, Dave, are you telling me that Lehi has a vision of the temple and the vision is negative? Are you saying the temple leads people astray? The image here in 1 Nephi 8 is clearly drawn from the architecture, furniture, language, names, and clothing of the temple. And yes, there is a dark element. The darkness is not that the temple in its true order is bad. Remember that in Lehi's dream, the path forward culminates in arriving at the tree of life. See below. This is wholly positive. One arrives and eats of the fruit that is desirable to make one happy. But there are obstacles. Lehi tells us that the people in charge of the actual building mock the faithful who are trying to use it as the way it was intended. He indicates that the practices that those people carry out in the temple, e.g. the burning of incense, mislead the faithful and cause them to become lost. This is thoroughly consistent with what Nephi tells us in the beginning of his record about his father's ministry. Quote, "Therefore I would that ye should know that after the Lord had shown so many marvelous things unto my father, Lehi, yea, concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, behold, he went forth among the people, and began to prophesy, and to declare unto them concerning the things which he had both seen and heard. And it came to pass the Jews did mock him, because of the things which he testified of them. For he truly testified of their wickedness and their abominations, and he testified that the things which he saw and heard, and also the things which he read in the book, manifested plainly of the coming of a Messiah, and also of the redemption of the world. And when the Jews heard these things, they were angry with him, yea, even as with the prophets of old, whom they had cast out and stoned and slain. And they also sought his life, that they might take it away. But behold, I, Nephi, will show unto you, the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen, because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance. That's 1 Nephi 1:18-20. The Jews, i.e. the royal tribe, mock Lehi, just as the people in the spacious building mock those trying to follow Lehi to the tree of life. I take these to be the same people who are in charge in Jerusalem, the royal family, servants, administrators, and priests. No wonder we have missed for so long that 1 Nephi 8 was a vision of the temple. We've been distracted by the jeering rich and by the mists of darkness, which have, in fact, led us astray. We should have stayed focused on the tree of life. I also did say, quote, and it came to pass that I beckoned unto them, and I also did say unto them with a loud voice that they should come unto me, and partake of the fruit, which was desirable above all other fruit. 1 Nephi 8:15. Lehi stands beside the tree and calls to his family to come forward. The presence of the tree with good fruit marks his location as the Holy of Holies, or Debir. At least this is the Debir as Matthew describes in the Sermon on the Mount, since Kings and Chronicle places the menorah as the tree in the second room. We'll say much more about this discrepancy in chapter 11. 11, it's always 11. And the name of the room, Debir, has often been taken to be connected to Davar, which means word, even if that view is historically incorrect. It seems to have been Lehi's understanding, or at least the basis of his wordplay. And here's a footnote for that, about the wordplay. We can cut him some slack here. He was a prophet, not a philologist. And after all, Brown, Driver, and Briggs might be wrong. That's true too. Lehi saying with a loud voice indicates that he is standing in the place of speech, the room of the word. In Hebrew, he stands in the Debir, and he, the Dibber, spoke. D-I-B-B-E-R, Dibber. More on the Dibber as I can't decide how. Debir. More on the Debir as the room of the word, capitalized, room of the word, capitalized later in this chapter. Ooh, cool. Whose fruit was desirable to make one happy. And I also beheld a straight and narrow path, which came along by the rod of iron, even to the tree by which I stood. And it also led by the head of the fountain, unto a large and spacious field, as if it had been a world. 1 Nephi 8:20. In the Sermon on the Mount, the straight and narrow gate leads to the tree with good fruit. In Lehi's vision, which is showing us the same ordinance in the same space, the straight and narrow path leads to the tree. And it came to pass that I beheld a tree, whose fruit was desirable to make one happy. And it came to pass that I did go forth and partake of the fruit thereof, and I beheld that it was most sweet above all I ever before tasted. Yea, and I beheld that the fruit thereof was white, to exceed all the whiteness that I had ever seen. And as I partook of the fruit thereof, it filled my soul with exceedingly great joy. Wherefore I began to be desirous that my family should partake of it also. For I knew that it was desirable above all other fruit. 1 Nephi 8:10-12. The tree in Matthew 7 has good fruit, Lehi's tree has fruit desirable to make one happy. This fruit is white and sweet like manna, suggesting that the bread eaten in the temple should be understood as the fruit of the tree, and that Jesus understood himself to be the fruit of the tree. We'll come back to the witness of the whiteness of the fruit and the tree in chapter 10. And we'll also talk about why it's significant that the fruit can make you happy. For now, let's remind ourselves that this is no ordinary tree. It is the tree of life. I beheld a river. And as I cast my eyes round about, that perhaps I might discover my family also, I beheld a river of water, and it ran along, and it was near the tree of which I was partaking the fruit. 1 Nephi 8:13. Remember from the discussion in chapter 4 that there may have been a cistern in the Holy of Holies, in the Well of Souls, a cave beneath the foundation of stone. Whether or not there was an actual water in the physical room, there is water in the visionary accounts of it. In Matthew 7, the water of the Dibir manifested as a storm that only the wise man seated on God's throne could survive. Here it appears as a river of water, which strangely has more than one face. When explained in Nephi to Laman and Lemuel, is hell. It is hell. Let me reread that. In Matthew 7, the water of the Dibir manifested as a storm that only the wise man seated on God's throne could survive, as in the wise man built his house upon a rock. Here it appears as a river of water, which strangely has more than one face. When explained by Nephi to Laman and Lemuel, it is hell. And they said unto me, What meaneth the river of water which our father saw? And I said unto them, that the water which my father saw was filthiness, and so much was his mind swallowed up in other things that he beheld not the filthiness of the water. And I said unto them, that it was an awful gulf which separated the wicked from the tree of life, and also from the saints of God. And I said unto them, it was a representation of that awful hell, which the angel said unto me, was prepared for the wicked. That's 1 Nephi 15, 6, 26 through 29. I'm going to end it here, and we're going to start on this in the next one, but let me show you the diagram he has. And so this is the diagram, similar to the one he had earlier in the book. Here's the porch with the two pillars, and having it be called, porch, ulam, field, as it were the world. And then the second space, which is the straight and narrow path, rod of iron. It looks like he drew some steps with an arrow going up. The nave, the holy place, call, great and spacious building, mocking fine clothes, mists of darkness. And then the final part, the oracle, the holy of holies, the Dibir, and let's see what does it also say. Lehi speaks, and tree with good fruit at the top. And so this is his diagram. And oh, God. Oh, man. I'm so thoroughly impressed. I'm so very thoroughly impressed. I am. This is a pattern that I am never going to be able to forget. It was being seared in my brain with repetition about the porch, the Hekal, and the Dibur. The Ulam Hekal and Dibir. At least the form. I'm having a hard time remembering the words. Those I might not be great at, but most importantly, the structure of this is just fantastic. To me, our depictions of art of this is that we have the world, the kind of path with the we depict it as a railing, um, and I've seen little clips from Dave Butler that he's like, it's not a railing, it's a rod, which has, I think, specific meaning to like a rod or scepter. So it's just like a big rod or scepter that someone is holding out to you. And we have that river that is just awful and filthy and people are drowning in it. And on the other side is the great and spacious building, which on some of the really cool pictures of it, it shows, all these different buildings throughout time that the mist of darkness are all around the bottom. So you don't see the base of the structure. And then you have in the foreground, the families of the tree of life. And then some of them are, oh, I'm being shamed by those people in the other room. I'll put that away. That makes so much sense. I mean, again, I think if you have no idea what you're looking at, if you are a new member of the Church of Jesus Christ, and you're just reading the Book of Mormon, and you're seeing this dream, and let's say you're actually paying attention, and you're like, oh, this is cool, you can get so much still. And I think the church in general, and even the stuff that we teach our children, is perfectly fine and correct. Like, oh, hey, you don't listen to the people who mock the being righteous and other things like that, because it still all applies. This is why I love symbolism. It still all applies. But when you refurnish your mind, like this book is just jamming me into the temple so hard, not only it's like a mixture of our modern day temple as well as a mixture of the Solomon's temple. I just wow. It really, 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 really uncovers so much. Like, I'm impressed. I wonder. You could get a lot of work done. Sorry, I'm thinking about numbers and him talking about, feeding the 5,000 and feeding the 4,000. And what if it actually meant not only like, we take it to mean physically there was loaves and fishes. And he's saying, what if Jesus Christ administered the ordinances on a very wide scale and brought people into the church? Well, what's funny about that is in those depictions, they talk about there being extra baskets of bread and fish. And so, to me, it's both the physical miracle and the application of the ordinance or the course of the Lord, as Dave Butler puts it. It just makes, because they talk about the baskets of bread and fish that they have after. That's just crazy amazing. Oh wow. I'm sitting here thinking about if we always talk about when we get into talking about the millennium in the church, we tend to talk about, hey, we've got temples and temple ordinances that'll be going all the time, so we can help everyone who didn't have the opportunity to have temple and temple ordinances throughout time. So anyone who wants to be there. But I'm sitting here thinking, if you can administer temple ordinances on a massive scale, because you being in a physical mountain or wide space, etc., and walking them through this information and promises and blessings and things like that, why not do 5,000 at once? Why not do 5,000 twice in a day. You know, depending on how loud your voice can be. And what if you could, and then I was just starting to think about what if you could do this to progressively larger and larger groups. The only limiting factor is literally who can be seen and heard. It's just kind of a cool idea. Anyways, I wanted to stop here. I really am finding this fascinating because now I can see exactly how it. Because of the discussions that Dave Butler had on Ward Radio and other places like that, I understood that he kept saying that the Tree of Life was in the Holy of Holies area, the Debir area, and that we should pay attention to that. And there's even more. And we're only in chapter 5, and we know there's chapter 11 at least, if not more, chapter 12 and such. So it's like we've got more coming, and probably more in depth about each of these symbols. And I just sit here and think, yep, nope, I get it. I could see it in the modern day temple, but I can also see it in the, just take a look, think about it. And you can see that there is a lot of the same symbolism. It's just not as blatant. It's not as, oh, look, see how this is? But it's there. And the funny thing is we have everything so pared down to being the absolute basics so we can get as much work done as possible, which is really cool and really key, and it very much centers everything on Christ. I think, like I said, we get a straight shot instead of the long, deeper, more involved stuff. It does remove us from the mental furniture and depth of the scriptures, but it all points to one thing: Jesus Christ is Messiah. Jesus Christ is the fruit of the tree, and Jesus Christ is the Messiah and the Savior, and things like that. So, to me, it makes me appreciate the whole length and breadth of what God has been doing over all time. Like, if my house were to have anything happen to it, there is a few books I would grab. I would grab my scriptures, the Lost 116 Pages, Key to the Keystone, because I can't wait for that, and In the Language of Adam, and a few other personal things. If I had to lose everything, and I could only keep a few things, I would keep these kind of specifics and knowledge, because it's just so good and so important. And In the Language of Adam just ties you to so much of, like, I am now saying how, wait, I need to go back and reread all these different stories with this temple furniture in mind, specifically the stuff that they would have had, which would have been Solomon's temple, because we don't have, although the modern day temple that we have, I can see how it's very similar, but we just don't recognize it in the same way. We just don't, because it's not as here's this physical thing, and it ties to, well, it does tie to certain scriptures that we already have and know. Like Dave Butler talks about the course of the Lord being in the Garden of Eden, and the progression of people through the temple is following and getting commandments of God. It's like, no, it's very, very similar. It's just the difference is that it's focused, the temple now is specifically focused on, here is the journey and the commandments, and okay, so I think it's just that it's just like they're right here, right next to each other. They're doing the same thing. The only difference is that there's a slight bit of difference in time and understanding, because they have the old temple, which had pillars at the front on the porch, and then they had certain stuff in the middle section, like tables and shewbread and menorahs, and we don't have those physical objects. And then you had the Holy of Holies, which has the Ark of the Covenant, the judgment seat, the stone on the mount, all that. Okay? And then you have our modern temples where it's like following the exact same pattern, but it doesn't have the same physicality. It doesn't have like specifically 2 pillars, but we do understand the same thing from it. We definitely don't have incense, and we don't have menorahs or bread and, and shewbread and stuff in the temple, but it has the information about commandments and learning to follow God and look to Jesus Christ. And then in the Holy of Holies, it's a place of peace, a place of light, a place of rest and understanding. But that's the part where it's a bit different, is because since we don't have the judgment seat, the Ark of the Covenant, the physical objects are not quite the same. But if the idea is that the tree of life is in there, yes, we do. The light and life of the world, the fruit of the ordinances, the gospel, it's in there. It's so funny, because we're just like, the physical representation of certain things is just slightly different. And that's all. It's really cool. Anyways, I know I kind of ramble on at the end because I'm just mulling over what I'm learning, but he's really convincing me, that's for sure. Love you lots. Have a good Wednesday.